Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Miranda, and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. So today's video is a really fun one that I don't think I've ever done just a full video discussing this before, and that topic is Avalon as a fairyland, but more importantly, as an Isle of the Dead. So yeah, we're gonna get into that for Samhain season and talk through all of the interesting facets of Avalon as, in fact, the land of the dead. But first, I do want to go over my normal little announcements and disclaimers, reminders, if you will. Firstly, other than having this YouTube channel, I also have a website, whiteroseofavalon.life, with a blog that I update daily. And I also provide metaphysical services through my site, through my business, White Rose of Avalon LLC. So you can order a tarot reading with me or a mentoring session. And I also have online classes. I'm currently wrapping up my first round of my 7-month-long online class, The Melusine Mysteries, right now, which is exciting and a little sad, but it's been an amazing experience, and I can't wait to launch the next round in the spring. And I also have a Patreon, Avalonian Rose Fairy Mysteries. That is a fairy mystery community if you would like to join in that way. And lastly, I do have a collaboration with the jewelry brand Otter Spirit. I have a whole video about that on this channel, which I will link for you, as well as the blog post discussing that. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get into the topic at hand. So, Avalon is a name of the holy blessed isle of the other world that first comes to us through Arthurian legends. Specifically, we have discussions of Avalon in a lot of the early Arthurian works, like Geoffrey of Monmouth's Vita Merlini, which gives us the first discussion of Morgan Le Fay and a description of the blessed isle of the other world as this island where everything grows in abundance. You don't have to tend it, it just grows. And humans who do find themselves in Avalon live very, very long lives, and there are many fairy women and fairy beings living on Avalon. But Avalon is where Arthur is taken as he's dying to be healed by Morgan Le Fay. So here's the thing. To be healed, this does not necessarily mean that he's going to be alive again, because he's residing in Avalon from thenceforth. So really, he's being healed spiritually and awaiting the time when he can return as the once and future king. So right there in the earliest literary reference, there's this connection with the dead. And the other world in general, Avalon's part of the other world, right? And the other world in general is a place of both the Fae realms and where fairy beings exist, and realms of the dead exist. So in Celtic legends and lore, there's not this distinction between, oh, this is where the living reside, this is where the Fae reside, this is where the dead reside. Once you get to the other world, whether you call it the other world, Anoon, Avalon, Faeryland, Fairy, Elfame, all different names, but whether we say there's one fairy realm or many, once you get through the veil into these fairy realms, there isn't necessarily a distinction between, oh, only the dead can go here, or only the Fae exist here, or the living humans can't get there until they die. Because it's very easy to find yourself in fairyland when we look through old folklore. It happens quite often. So it's this relationship between living and dead that's not necessarily shown in some other old myths and legends and folklore, because the other world truly exists just through the veil of this world. And right now, as we're getting into Samhain season, that veil becomes very, very thin. That's why we feel the dead so much more easily now. That's why we feel the fae so much more easily now. It's all part of that thinning of the veil that happens both at Samhain and at Beltane. So yes, not as simple as just the living and the dead, and they're completely separate. And that's what I love about being a priestess of Avalon, about, well, one of many things I love about being a priestess of Avalon, is that there is no distinction. It is liminal, it is misty, it is not either one or the other. It's many things all at once. Avalon is many things all at once. And that's what we see time and time again in fairy lore, in Celtic folklore, is just this interweaving. Things don't simply exist either one or the other. We can access Avalon as living people. We will go to Avalon when we die, if that is where we're meant to end up. And we can communicate with the Fae of Avalon, with the fairy queen goddesses of Avalon, if that's something we want to work to build a relationship with. So yes, it's beautiful, it's complex, it's misty, and a little bit confusing even, but I think there's beauty in the confusion. So I did cover, I'm just checking my notes here because I have some notes. So yeah, Avalon is a place of immortality and abundance. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, the earliest literary references to Avalon by the name Avalon do come from Arthurian legend and from often Morgan ferrying Arthur to Avalon, although in Vita Merlini, she's there and he's taken to her. But no matter what, even in the later Arthurian legends, Morgan Le Fay is connected to Avalon. She's the Lady of Avalon. And no matter how evil she's portrayed, she always comes to Fairy Arthur to Avalon after the Battle of Camlan when he is dying. It's a sacred duty. It's Morgan Le Fay as a psychopomp, as the death doula, preparing him and taking him to the Holy Isle, where yes, he will be healed. But again, I interpret that healing when we're like interpreting the folklore in the original legends. That healing isn't to, oh, he's healed and he will then be able to just rejoin the land of the living. No, it's healing of his soul, so his soul can be at rest and enjoy the abundance, the beauty, the bliss of being in Avalon. And yes, because of the folklore associated with Arthur as the once and future king, we have that idea that he can come again. He can rise again from this. He will return from Avalon when his country is in need of him. So it's beautiful and so poignant. But that's the crux of the matter. That's what we have in the oldest folklore discussing Avalon, is the reference to the dead. Yes, the reference to the Fae as well, because of the discussion of like the ninefold sisterhood of fairy women and several ninefold sisterhoods. It's not just on Avalon, there's a lot of other ninefold groups of women who are fairy women or witches or other arcane practitioners throughout Celtic legend and lore. But specific to Avalon, the Ninefold Sisterhood, is led by Morgan Le Fay, of course, and each of them have their own specific abilities, and each of them are very powerful magical women in their own right, as well as being priestesses. So, yeah. Let's see what else I wanted to cover. So I wanted to discuss briefly, I'm not going to go super in depth, but many Avalonian fairy queens are also associated with the dead. They have death aspects. Obviously, as I've been discussing, Morgan Le Fay does have the energy of being a death doula, of being a psychopomp, ferrying Arthur to Avalon, taking the living into the realm of the dead. That's one of the most obvious death aspects you can have. And we see this all across cultures, of this god or goddess who is taking the living and bringing them into the afterlife. So Morgan Le Fay, amongst many things that she does, also does that. And then Rhiannon has the Adar Rhiannon, the birds of Rhiannon, and they are known for their ability to lull the living to sleep and wake the dead. So they are soothing the souls of the living, but they can also raise the dead. So that directly links Rhiannon to having a death aspect, even though most often people think of her as very much a goddess associated with life and abundance. She is that, of course, but as with most fairy queens, she's not just that. And directly in her story, we do have reference to the Adar Rhiannon. And in fact, in the Mabinogion, the Adar Rhiannon sometimes appear when Rhiannon herself does not. In the second branch, they appear, and Rhiannon isn't in that branch at all, but they are there to soothe the survivors of the battle between Britain and Ireland, or Wales and Ireland more specifically, as there's only 7 survivors. Not to get deep into that branch, but there's 7 survivors after this battle. Bronn the Blessed himself has been poisoned, but his head is taken with them, and his head can still talk to them. Again, very complex. But Bronwyn and the 7 men who survived feast in this hall where they are soothed by the birds of Rhiannon. The birds of Rhiannon are soothing the souls of the living, one of their primary purposes. And because of Bran technically having died, because he got a poisoned spear in his thigh and then his head was removed, even though he could speak to them as if in life, he's technically passed on. So we have that death aspect coming out there as well. Then, of course, we have the stories of Cara Dwen, who is the great goddess of inspiration, and she who brews the potion of Alwyn for her son. The 3 drops of the potion not going to her son, instead going to her servant Guion, who, or some people say Guion, not really sure which is the correct pronunciation. I am still working on my Welsh, but he's accidentally got these 3 drops of potion that grant wisdom and divine inspiration. And after that, the rest of the potion is poison, and she could only brew it once. So there's that famed chase where she's chasing him, and they're changing shapes. And then finally, as a hen, she pecks up all the grain on a threshing room floor, because he had turned himself into a stalk of grain. And then she discovers she's pregnant. Even in all of her anger, when she gives birth to him, birthing him a second time, he is too beautiful of a baby for her to destroy him. So she sets him out on the water in a coracle, and then he is found downstream by a prince who names him Taliesin. Becomes the greatest bard in all of Wales. And so not only is Cerridwen a goddess of wisdom and inspiration and a mother goddess, she's also embodying the womb and the tomb dynamic of mother goddesses. She births, but she can also destroy. She is the devouring mother in many ways. And that I associate deeply with being a death aspect, because she is the womb and the tomb made manifest in her story. So my beloved Melusine does have a death aspect, because she comes to her husband and her sons and then to her descendants to cry or wail like a banshee before their deaths, the 3 days leading up to their deaths. And that's quite obvious that that is a death aspect. She is honoring and warning of their deaths and mourning those losses. But because she is an Avalonian goddess, she can be there to welcome them. And then finally, a little bit less obviously death aspects, but Blodeuwedd and Guinevere do have a bit of death aspect energy to them. Blodeuwedd in her owl form is very fierce, and owls are hunting animals, they're birds of prey. And so when the flower becomes the owl, she does have a bit of that death energy. Not obviously, but we can argue that it's there. And with Guinevere, even less so that that is an obvious thing, because more so I would think of her as being on that spectrum. If we align her with Morgan Le Fay, Morgan being the death aspect and her being the life, Morgan being more Samhain energy, Guinevere being more Beltane energy, if you will. But her often maligned viewpoint, how people view her in this often very maligned way as this seductress who just had affairs because she wanted to have affairs with no actual depth of reasoning, is to me online with this misunderstood energy that any death goddess is going to have. And beyond that, in some of the Arthurian legends, she is nearly executed, nearly put to death by burning at the stake, but she's saved by Lancelot. And obviously that has a lot of mirroring with actual witch trials in Europe and the UK, where women did have that happen to them in the tragedy of the way we have looked at magical practitioners over the years. But in any case, no matter how we view Avalon, whether we see Avalon as this land of just abundance and fertility and life, Avalon is that. Or we view Avalon as this home of priestesses and even a priestess college, if you will. Avalon is that. Or we say Avalon is the home of all of the Fae and is this mystical land. Yeah, Avalon is that. But Avalon is also always a land of the dead. And we see this time and time again through all these numbers of Arthurian legends and through other Celtic folklore that tells us of the other world being a place of fertility, abundance, and, you know, eternal immortal life energy, and of the Fae, but also being a place where the living who have passed go after their deaths to await their rebirths. That is the absolutely fascinating thing about Avalon. She's not one thing, she is so many things. And I am so grateful to be a priestess of Avalon. to be the Enchantress of Avalon, to be able to share the wisdom of Avalon and the fairy queens with people. So yes, I do hope you've enjoyed this short, rather rambling video about Avalon as a fairyland of the dead. If you did, please, like, comment, subscribe, and check out my website for so much more content. As again, I post on my blog every single day. And I hope you have a very blessed rest of your Samhain season.